Hi guys, welcome back to Dark Vaults. If you are new here, we cover Irish true crime. If you're not new, welcome back and thank you as always for your support. Today's video is the typical husband kills wife scenario that happens the world over. It's very much the stereotype of true crime really, isn't it? But something about today's husband is that he is fond of a few fibs and he is the only foreign national that was hanged by the Irish state. So we are just going to get straight into the case of James Lehman. Margaret Hayden was born in 1915 and grew up in Narramore, an area in County Kildare. In the family there were 4 girls and 3 boys. Like a lot of people in Ireland at that time, her family would have been considered poor. And at the age of 15, Margaret would leave home to move to Dublin for work as a domestic servant. However, in 1937, when she was 22, she would move to England for work with her sister Julia. The sisters would, work in different jobs. However, 2 years later, as you might know, in 1939, World War II started. So a lot of funding went into jobs that were based around the military and the war. And in October, the sisters would move to Aldershot for work. Now, I have read that Margaret worked in a shop on the barracks, and I've also heard that she worked in the military canteen. Whatever one it was, this is how she meets James. Listen, we're just going to get straight into it. James Herbert Lehman was a liar. In all aspects of life, that's what he was. So, in terms of his background, it's hard to know what's true. He would go by several names. So Lehman, as in Lehman. He would also go by Leighhmen for Lehman. Some other names he would go by were McCaig, McCabe, Feely, Martin, Richmond, Haynes. He just created all these different aliases. He could have been born in 1899 all the way up to 1905, depending on what story he was telling to who. Where he was born. So in Montreal, in Canada, in Washington, in Boston, in Dublin, again, depending on who he was talking to. He was an orphan after his parents dying when he was young. Then his dad was this famous, obstetrician, and his mother had died while he was a child. But what we do know was that in January 1940, he was a private in the Canadian Army, and they were based in Aldershot. And one of the sources says that they get talking because he tries to use like a dollar bill in the canteen or in the shop, and obviously this kind of strikes up a conversation because Margaret has to explain to him that they use pounds, not dollars. They strike up a friendship relationship. What seems to be quite evident is that James is good at charming people and getting into very quick, positive friendships and relationships with people, but that they don't last. And actually, in one of the sources, it will say that this is a sign of a sociopath because they can form these very strong relationships quite quickly, but that they can't keep them, like they can't sustain them for long term. And apparently that's a sign of a sociopath. I did not know that. So, like within a week or so of them meeting, they would travel to London together and they would stay in a hotel under the pretense of man and wife. By the end of February, they would be married. They would have a home in Aldershot and Julie would actually live with them for a while. And on Christmas Day of that same year, their first child, Kevin, was born. If you want to do the maths back, you might question that it was because someone was pregnant, that's why they got married. If you go back to kind of 9-10 months. Now again, that's just speculation. It's not actually said in any of the sources. Of that same year, on the 1st of June 1940, while during like a German a bombing raid in Dover, they were unloading a ship and he would seriously injure his back. So when his platoon or whatever was sent overseas, he was actually unfit to do so. So he was kept back and he done duties then on the base. And it's actually said that on Christmas Eve he received a telegram to say that Margaret wasn't well, which we obviously know then was her going into labour because her son was born the next day. But he had asked for permission to go and it was refused. Now I kind of feel like If he had told them that that's what it was, he would have been allowed go, but I'm not sure. He goes anyway, but doesn't come back until February, and he is given like 90 days detention. So I don't know if that's the same sense of in school where you would just literally be jailed essentially, or like in a way for the 90 days. However, he appeals it and he wins. He would actually eventually be discharged as, disabled from the army, and he would have his pension. This would happen in January 1942. So between this time and August 1943, there isn't a lot of kind of information on them. We do know that they then have a little girl, Patricia, and she was born in January 1943. Another thing we know is that James, didn't seem to be great at providing for the family, in terms of he seemed to just kind of decide to do whatever job he wanted. He like kept chickens at one point. He done, just different kind of random things instead of thinking, well, I've left the army, I now need a new career and to go from that. Now also obviously the war times makes that difficult, but it is seen that they were struggling financially. On the 26th of August 1943, the family would move back to Ireland, and they would actually stay in Narramore with Margaret's family in the beginning. Now, one source says that James is not impressed by like how poor they are, and so that he actually goes and stays in a B&B. Now, again, like if you had the money to stay in a B&B, do you not have the money to rent somewhere for your family to stay with you? Or why wouldn't your family also be in the B&B with you? But the whole thing about her family being like poor is a huge thing through the whole story. He will say it to people, that, oh, like she's not from good people and all of this malarkey. So they were living with Margaret's mother, who was also named Margaret. Now, young Margaret, actually went by Peg. So just to keep things kind of clear, I'll just call her Peg from now on, and her mom can be Margaret. So they were living on his army pension, which was £11. So that's what they had to kind of survive on until they got settled in Ireland. Now, in fairness to James, in terms of, getting like a job, his back pain was like a serious thing. He would actually go to a GP here in Ireland, and the GP would be like, you should be in hospital. That he had like arthritis in his bones or whatever, in his back. And so he actually did then get admitted into Ministry of Pensions Hospital in Leopardstown here in Dublin. So this was a hospital basically like that for veterans of the British Army. And here he would meet a lovely little nurse called Annie McCaig. And I'm sure, like the true crime fans that you are, you can see where this is going. So she immediately took an interest in him, and he took an interest in her. However, he decided to tell her that he had married an Irish woman, but that she had already been married before to a man named Stokes. So he would go on, and this wouldn't be the only woman that he would tell, that his wife was a bigamist and that she had been married before. And so, like, some of it was kind of like, so she then left him to go back to be with Stokes. Some of it was that they were still together and he was looking after her kids from Stokes and stuff like this. I think whatever way would get him the most sympathy is the story he told. And again, like that, telling her, even like telling Annie, oh, she was beneath me, she brought me down to the gutter and stuff like these are things he is quoted as saying to Annie, she would later say. Now I have to be honest, if I met a man and that is the type of stuff he was telling me about his ex, like that's a red flag, no matter what time of the century we're talking about here. Red flags if they're talking like that, saying like that she was from the gutter, her and her family, they brought me down and stuff like this. In December, he was discharged from hospital. It would be said that he had received a letter from Peg saying like, things weren't great back in her mother's home and that they needed to get out. Like they needed they needed a home of their own. So he left in December, but didn't tell his wife for 2 weeks. And so he actually set up himself in a little lodgings on Mount Street. And while here, he took little Annie to the pictures. And he would also bring her back to his lodgings. That's kind of all the information on there. And he would tell her that he had gotten her a ring, but that he wasn't giving it to her yet. He would also tell her of his plans now that he was in Dublin. He planned to open a baby food shop, which I think for the time was just very niche. Like niche. And he is telling Annie this, right? To tell her like what an amazing opportunity it's going to be. His plan was to open several stores because it was going to be so successful. And he wanted her to come on board as an investor. He also wanted her to, come work there. And as I said, Annie was smitten with James. So she said no to the job because, she was a nurse and she wanted to continue being a nurse. But she agreed to invest £25 from her savings. Now, he would tell her that he was going to also double that for her as a gift, that he would give her an extra 25 into the business, which I doubt happened. The landlady of his lodgings, Gertrude Moores, she would later tell how James was constantly talking bad about his wife. And it's funny because this time he basically is like, oh, nothing was good enough for her. He's saying like when they lived in England, they had 2 maids and like, oh, it still wasn't enough for her. So sorry, which is it? Is she from the like poor gutter, or is she like used to all these luxuries in life and you couldn't keep up? This landlady anyway basically had another like private residence a couple of doors down on Mount Street. And so just before Christmas, the family moved up. He finally, decided to tell them, and they all moved into this other residence. Gertrude would say that Peg was, a lovely lady, exceptionally quiet, and that she never went out. And it is said actually that for the first 6 weeks that they were up, she didn't go out because she had no form of transport. She had no buggy or anything like that for the children. She was also pregnant at this stage. So how are you supposed to be like making your way around with a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old while pregnant? So it's basically said that like for the 6 weeks she just never left the residence. James would then go to the landlady just before Christmas and tell her that money was tight, that his pension hadn't come true, and that they had no money for a Christmas dinner. And Gertrude, being a nice person, helped out. So she was going to basically then cook some food for them to send down, right, for the Christmas dinner. However, James didn't want to eat with his wife on Christmas Day. So he basically went up to the Moors for Christmas Day with their child, with their son Kevin, and they had dinner there, and dinner was sent down then for Peg and Patricia. Like, I was just so annoyed when I was reading the story, honestly. Then, a couple of days after Christmas, he rocks back up to Gertrude's again with a turkey and a ham. And you might be thinking, pension came true and he's doing a nice thing and, paying her back, and here, here you go, you guys can have this now for the next day or two. No. He told Gertrude that his brother-in-law gifted this dinner to them, but they had no way to cook it, and asked Gertrude would she mind cooking it for them to bring back to theirs. And Gertrude seemed sound, so Gertrude done it. It would appear that they also owed rent to Gertrude, and rather than clearing this up and staying there, they quietly packed up and moved out. And so on the 7th of January 1944, they moved in to 11 Leinster Road in Rathmines. Their new landlady, Winnie O'Callaghan, so basically they lived on like the ground floor, I think, and the first floor was for the Lehmans, and so there was like the bedroom, and then a second room was turned into like a little kitchenette, and so that's where they lived. And then on the 25th of January, James Lehman would open Sister Anne's Baby Saloon. Now, like, where are you going with the name? Firstly, but he would even tell a woman that he had come work for him, Anne Finucane, that there's a lot of Annes, that the shop was named after his fiancée, Annie McCraig. He would also tell Anne Finucane all about his horrible wife, who's a bigamist, but that they stayed on good terms. And again, it was a marriage of kind of, she'd gotten pregnant and so we had to get married. And even says like, because we had been together, the army made him marry her. And like Anne kind of questions this, as in, the army forced you to marry someone, and he was like, oh yeah, they can do that. He would also charm Anne Finucane in the sense that he would tell her, this was going to be such a successful venture, loads of shops, all of this, and tells her that the salary is 30 shillings a week, but that he needed a deposit of £40 as like an investment for it. And she done it. She paid him the £40, eager for this successful business. So the shop was on Chelmsford Road in Ranelagh, and it's interesting because Peg actually only ever visits once, and he does tell her after he speaks to her, he does actually tell Anne Finucane then, like, oh, that's quote my ex lady love, so thinks that she's the ex. So even then, they obviously weren't that comfortable or like not intimate, but like nice to each other in person for someone not to think that they were a couple, that they were married. And then when Annie McCaig would arrive by, she was there all the time, he introduced her as, this is the lady I'm going to marry. And he would even tell Anne Finucane that he bought a £300 ring for her. This ring that you're not getting just yet. He would tell Anne, I've only ever hated one person in my life, like implying that he hated Peg. He would also hire a nurse to be in the baby food store, but I don't know why. Again, I feel like he's just really like jumping over the top for all these type of things. But he has her, and again, he's telling her all these kind of lies and stuff, and like she's not buying it. So after 3 weeks, she quits. He just seems like this utter scumbag, doesn't he? Like just all these lies, and that he's telling it to all these women, and like that they're just charmed enough to kind of accept what he's saying. The baby food store did not do well. I don't know why you would think that that's a priority to people during like a war, like people are rationing things, and he decides to open a baby food store, which is, was a luxury. Even now, there are no real baby food stores that are like just for that. It's not a thing, like. But James would not be put down. He decided instead then to open a coffee store, so that he was then going to sell like jars of coffee and one mention of bread. So I think it was like, they'd sell a few other necessities as well, but the whole thing was like it was a coffee store. Again, even then, that was, for the time, was such a niche thing, right? Like you're in the middle of a world war and you're like, which type of roast will I have today? What coffee bean? I don't think we can doubt that James planned what he does. There are signs, one of them being he starts telling people, so like that Anne Finucane and stuff, he starts telling them that Peg is mad, and that she's suicidal, and would mention every so often then that like the GP basically has to tell her, like he was worried what she would do with the kids and stuff, right? But that the local GP then would call him to say like that she has done something, and then he had to take the kids to care for them. And like he would basically say it like, oh, she's done it again kind of thing, and like they might question and say, oh, like, was it poison, or he'd imply like she had, taken too much anodyne and stuff like this. And then on the 4th of March 1944, he would go to Gilsennon's pharmacy on Rathmines Road and tell him that he wanted to buy prussic acid, also known as cyanide. Now obviously the chemist is a bit like, are you sure that's what you need? What do you need it for? He would tell the pharmacist that he wanted to test the purity of coffee, and that apparently like it was a test that was done in Trinity College, and the chemist obviously believed this or whatever, but said, do you know this is a deadly poison? And he said, yes, I'm aware. And so he orders him some in, and the following week he goes and collects it. Anne Finucane would then say that one of the days in the shop she went in, and when she went into the back room, he's in there and he has like a scissors, and he's like, it's like a little, it comes as like a little crystal, and that he's like scraping it to make the powder, okay? And she asks, what's he doing? And he says that he's, doing a purity test for the coffee, blah, 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 blah. And that he tells her, like, but you have to be careful because it's a deadly poison. Then another day he comes in and he sees that she's using that scissors for something else, and like he screams at her to put it down. And she's saying like in her head she thought, well, like she had boiled it, it should have been fine, but it's kind of like, well, and how deadly is it? On Saturday, the 18th of March, James and Anne Finucane were closing up the store, and they close obviously on Sundays anyway, and Anne was going to be off then on the Monday. So James basically said that he was going to take the cash so that he would be ready then, he could bring it in then on the Monday to set up. And Anne says that she closed the door to the back room and that she was sure she did. But later, she would end up going in on the Monday anyway, for reasons we're going to get to quite soon. And she would say that the door to the back room was open when she went in, and she was sure she had closed it. Winnie, the landlady, had become close to Peg. Peg didn't really have a lot of people or support, and so they would kind of, chat and have tea and stuff together. And sometimes she would drop up, the newspaper later on in the day and sit with her and have a chat. From her perspective, in the sources, it's basically said that like James was constantly out. So he would go out to work all day, and then he'd come home for his dinner, and then he'd go back out again till like 11. By this point, Peg is like 8 months pregnant. So, Winnie would comment even that like it's so difficult managing the two children, like two young children, or like, oh, I'm telling you now, I know how she felt. Young toddlers basically, and then also being heavily pregnant and basically doing it all on your own. Even when the store was doing well, it didn't even seem like she had any money, like she still struggled. On that same Saturday, Winnie and Peg would meet and they would have a cup of tea and stuff like that, like as I said they usually do. Peg had a cold, but other than that, Winnie would say that she was in like fine form, she was okay. On Sunday, the 19th of March, she said she went out to Mass in the morning, and then when she came back, she didn't see the Lehmans at all that day. Again, she said that Peg would usually come down for a cup of tea, but she thought maybe because she had the cold, she didn't want to be coming down. Winnie was going out that evening, and she planned to get the bus at 7:45 p.m. So at about 7:20, she goes into her bathroom. The kitchenette for the Lehmans was above her bathroom, and she said that she heard some sort of noise and commotion, but she couldn't really tell what it was. Winnie would say that when she got back to her kitchen, she could like get a weird smell. She even asked her daughter if she knew, if she could smell it. Her daughter said that she had been cleaning her shoes, so perhaps that's what she was smelling. Then Winnie quickly went outside to grab some turf before obviously running to go get her bus. She was getting some turf for the fire, I assume. And this is when she met James Lehman coming down, because there was like stairs that led up to their apartment outside. And so he was coming down. He actually had like a ring, like a hot plate kind of thing. Winnie had lent it to them when they moved in because they had no way to cook. So he was supposed to be getting like a gas one, and so he was giving this back to her. So gave it back to her. And Winnie would ask him like how Peg was, obviously because she knew she had a cold and because she's pregnant and stuff. And he said she's not great. She seems to be acting a bit giddy. If she's not better by the morning, I'm going to call the doctor. And Winnie said that she would say like, and a nurse, because obviously being so close to the due date, that if anything was to go wrong, it would be good to have like a nurse or a midwife or whatever there. The reason I'm telling you all this is because this would not be what James would say happened on the Sunday the 19th. But I think it's important that like Winnie, you're not going to confuse what day he gave you back the hot plate and what would happen next. You're not going to confuse all that. He basically says, yeah, fine, if she, if she's still kind of giddy or whatever by the next morning, I'm going to call a doctor. And then that was it. Winnie heads back into hers and he heads back upstairs. Winnie is then hurrying because she's going to miss her bus, so she's hurrying to get ready, and then like that James comes bolting back down and says like, hurry, my wife is terribly ill. Winnie heads back up with him. She can hear moans coming from the bedroom, and the smell that she had gotten before, she's getting it even stronger now. James would say that he had brought her some rum to drink for her cold and that she must have taken it all. The children slept in the same room as them, in a different, in a single bed, and so they were in their pajamas in bed asleep. Peg was lying on the side of the bed, the duvet right up on her, or the blanket right up on her. Winnie would say that her face was contorted and she was foaming at the mouth. She said when she felt her, she was cold and clammy. Winnie would try talk and get a response from her, but she couldn't. And at this point, James is like starting the theatrics, so he's like pacing up and down, getting upset and stuff like this. Winnie left and went 2 doors down to her friend Annie Byrne and told her to go to like the nearest phone box and to ring the doctor and to come back. At this point, Winnie goes back. Peg's eyes are now closed. Her face has started to go like the bluish colour, and she's no longer moaning or anything. Annie Byrne would then rush down to the flat as well, and she would say that the doctor, Dr. McCormick, immediately said like, no, you need to ring an ambulance, and so she hung up and rang an ambulance, and so they were waiting. And again, James is running up and down, rushing up. At this point, like the children have woken, and they are obviously like, what's going on? Winnie would actually take them downstairs and kind of settle them with a drink and a blanket and stuff like that. The ambulance would arrive, and James Quirk, one of the paramedics, said that he obviously wanted to go in and check her vitals and stuff like that, and that James was like in the way, sitting there beside her, whispering something to her. Eventually, he had to move him and got in beside her. And that almost immediately he turned to James and said, we should have been called a long time before now. And that James said, I've been hours trying to get a doctor. Winnie is in the room, and Winnie, ears perk up. What? And so just to go to what he's basically going to say happened is that his wife had started to feel unwell. He called a doctor, couldn't get through to a doctor, and then he called an ambulance, and then he called Winnie, and she arrived, and then they were waiting for the ambulance, and like, oh, waiting so long and stuff. Whereas when Winnie was talking to him, he was like, oh, she's still not well, I'll call one in the morning. So a doctor had not been tried to be reached. Peg would be put into the ambulance to be brought to the Rotunda Hospital. James goes with her. Peg would pass away on the way to the hospital. Her sister Bridget worked at the Rotunda Hospital, and so when the ambulance pulled up, she saw James in the hospital or outside or whatever, and obviously he's like, what's going on, and James would say, oh, Peg has been having dizzy spells. When James arrived back home late that night, he would tell Winnie and Anne, quote, she's dead, and twin boys have been taken dead from her. Another source would say that a baby boy, had to be delivered by cesarean and obviously had died. And in another thing, I'm going to put up like a letter that he sends to someone, he says that it was a baby girl that she delivered. So like there are no parts of this man's life that he seems to be able to just tell the truth. Winnie would get him like a cup of tea to comfort him, and that he would say, poor Peg, I knew she had something on her mind. So immediately again, as soon as she's gone, he's then start, planting those seeds again of like, she done this is something she done. So James at some point then makes contact with Anne Finucane and tells her what's after happening, and she agrees then obviously to go in on the Monday and open up the shop. Like I said, she arrives, the door to the back office, so to the back room where he had the cyanide, was open. There was also money in the till, and before, remember, he had taken the cash, so there shouldn't have been anything there. So it's nearly like he had known something was going to happen, that he wouldn't be in on the Monday. Also, I'll just point out here that cyanide is said to have like an almond smell to it, and I don't know if this is the smell that Winnie was getting. She doesn't say that it was a kind of sweet smell, she doesn't say like it was a horrible smell, she just says that she kept getting this strange smell. He would also tell Anne Finucane that when Annie McCaig would come by to let her know that, this has happened. Again, bear in mind, to all these people, he's not telling them that his wife, the mother of his children, had died. He is saying, my ex-wife, the bigamist, has died, and now, this whole thing. So he's still getting the sympathy from it, but without with risk to all the tales he is told. So he basically says that he will come meet Annie at 2 p.m. at the shop. Now, it turns out that he was actually supposed to have dinner with Annie on the Sunday night with friends. So even then, he was planning to do this and made plans anyway with his mistress. He wouldn't show up at 2 p.m. and this would lead Annie to be annoyed, obviously. She'd been embarrassed he didn't show up and stuff. So she decided to start doing some investigation about him and about his wife. It was suspected that Peg might have been poisoned, and so a sergeant would go to the flat the day after her death and search, particularly in jars and boxes and stuff, but nothing was found. Straight away, when the pathologist was told, of the circumstances of Peg's death, he immediately said that he wanted, well, her body, but another source said, like, 4 of her organs, he wanted them to test them. This test would come back that there was cyanide in her system. James and the children would go to stay in Narramore with Margaret, Peg's mother. One source says that basically James was called down to the station, and that when the detective says that she died of cyanide poison, that he says, like, what? Cyanide? Like, real drastic and over dramatic as he likes to be. They would then take a lengthy statement from him from 3 p.m. to 4 a.m. At Peg's funeral, again, he was planting those seeds, and he was trying to say that at Christmas they had had a big argument because of her drug taking. The pharmacist from Gilsennans would come forward to say that he sold the cyanide to Lehman. James then kind of knows the jig is up, and he leaves Narramore without his kids. And he heads to Monaghan and basically just hangs out here for a while, like, again, inventing this new life. He starts going on dates with a girl there. As soon as the Gardaí become aware that he has left, they send out a bulletin to all the Garda stations in Ireland, and they put out a press conference, and like the newspapers and stuff will say that they are looking for him, and they describe him. So he's 5'11", he has dark hair, brown eyes, he's quite sallow. They say that he has horn-rimmed glasses with a moustache and gold teeth. And so obviously when he moves up to Monaghan, he stops using his glasses and shaves his moustache and takes out his gold teeth. So he books into the Oriel Hotel in Monaghan, and he would tell the hotel manager that he was in the Air Force, but he would say that his name was James McCaig. He started drinking in one of the local pubs and got chatting to a bus driver, Charles Scott. So they started getting on, and basically he would ask him for a lend of money so that he could travel back to Belfast, because that's where he had to meet his regiment. And your man is like, I don't have that type of money, but gave him a bus ticket to get there. So he got the bus to Belfast, to Clifton Street, to the RAF recruitment centre, and he would try sign up. He said he was from America, didn't have his papers on him, but wanted to join the forces, and obviously they're like, yeah, cool man, cool. Just come back when you get your papers. You can't just join up to an army without being able to prove who you are. So he comes back to Monaghan. So he's up here about a week, and then the police catch up with him. And so one of the mornings he orders breakfast to his room, and instead of the food arriving, detectives arrive. And he's lying on the bed real casual when they come in, and he's just like, I'm not James Lehman, I'm James McCaig. I don't look like that person, that's not me. And just insistent that he's not him. I don't have a moustache, what are you talking about? So he was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife Peg. The case would come to trial on the 16th of October 1944. James would take the stand, and he would be up there for over 2 hours testifying. And again, it was different things. So essentially it was that they were both drug addicts, and then obviously that she died then because she took too much of something. He would say that he found a letter from her, and basically in it that it had said that she had committed suicide and to forgive him and stuff. I'm actually going to read it out to you. What he says is in it, because, he was like, I had to burn it. I had to get rid of it. I couldn't let people see it. I didn't want my children to ever see that. Because it's funny, because for something that he says he burned, he was able to keep in mind what it was, what he had read. Dear Jim, please forgive me for what I'm about to do. I know it will be hard for you, especially with the children. I know that it is impossible to be without morphine. It is so hard to get, nearly impossible. I am afraid that my baby will be affected by it. I just could not stand that. I am now taking the balance of the acid. I am placing the bottle in my coat pocket so that you will not know if it does not work. If it does, you will know that I have died praying for forgiveness. I have seen the priest, and I am now at peace with myself. Please take the children to Canada as soon as you can. There is only one thing on my mind. Larry's true name is Dorset L. Stokes. You know the rest. Please forgive and take good care of the children. Love, Peg. As in, that was the true name of her other husband, Stokes. He would then say that he couldn't remember anything from the 19th of March up until the 2nd of July. Memory just gone. It would come out at trial that he had another mistress, a Mrs. Isolde Byrne, and she actually had a shop next to his, and that's how they met. And in his testimony, remember I said that he had said, oh, she was, Peg was sick and I was looking after her and all this. He would say that he had looked after the kids that morning because Peg wasn't feeling well, and that he then went out to the shops, to get some stuff for them. But it would turn out that this is where he went. The day that his wife is supposed to be so sick, he's off in Isolde's house playing with her kids. But even after all this, he is awaiting trial. He is in Mountjoy jail, and Isolde visits him 83 times. His defence would basically try to put forward, there was no real motive other than all his mistresses. There was no real motive, and sure, if he had done it, why would he come back after he made it to Belfast? Because obviously that's a different jurisdiction. Sure, why would he come back then? And I truly think he came back purely because he wanted to keep the fantasy going. The trial would last 9 days, and on the 25th of October, the jury would deliberate for just 3 hours, and then they found him guilty of the murder of Peg. He would appeal this, and of all the death sentences that happened in Ireland that I've spoke about, his was the only one whose appeal was upheld. So there was a second trial in January 1945, and this time he did not take the stand. He was of course found guilty again, and his second appeal was not upheld. So he was sentenced to hang. And on the 19th of March 1945, 1 year to the day, when he took his wife's life, he died by hanging. After he was found guilty, obviously there's a lot more kind of paperwork and research and stuff done, and it was basically figured out that his real name was George Iams, or Eames, like IAMS. They believe that he was born in 1899 Washington DC, and he had been in prison several times, which is obviously why he had to change his identity to get into the Air Force. In 1926, he was found guilty of fraud in Kansas and served 1 year. 1932, he served 2 short sentences for various offences. In 1936, grand larceny. He was married twice before Peg, one resulting in 2 children and the other with 1. So he had 5 children before his wife Peg was pregnant with the 6th child. Another interesting thing, because to be honest, I find these bits interesting, I suppose, and I think you guys do too. So as I said, James was the only foreign national hanged by the Irish state. He was also, you know how there was Thomas Pierrepoint and Albert Pierrepoint? So Albert had helped with a few with his uncle Thomas in the lead up to James hanging. But this would be his first one that he done on his own as the lead executioner. And they wanted a local person on it. So that person went by Thomas Johnson. Obviously that's a pseudonym because they're anonymous. And they were the assistant or the aide for this one. Guys, that's it for today's story. I found this one, I just kept getting annoyed because I just felt like this poor woman, Peg, obviously probably thought that she was going to have this nice life by, finding this upstanding gentleman, a member of the Air Force and stuff like that. And he just made her life a struggle before taking it. And just even the fact that before and after she died, he just dragged her name through the mud. So guys, we're not going to ramble. Let me know what you do think of this case. I like being able to bring a case to you, a story to you, and then also having extra information. So I thought a little bit about the hangings and stuff was interesting. Yeah, I'm going to have 2 out this week. I'm recording them both today. And yeah, you can let me know what you think. And hopefully by my next video, I'm going to be 5,000. And yeah, you can help me with that. If you haven't subscribed but you are enjoying the content, please do. Please share with anyone else that you know that likes true crime. Yeah, that's it really. Do you know what, actually, I asked on my the community tab, but I'm going to ask here as well, because I like knowing. When you watched the first video from me, what made you come back for a second one? Right, that's the first question. And the second question is, why do you like true crime? For me, I told you before, I like the mystery, I like the unsolved, because it's kind of fascinating, the possibilities of what could have happened, and also then the idea of how people's minds work, how there can be these different levels of evil, So yeah, let me know your answers to those 2 questions. That's it. I hope you all have a lovely weekend. Stay safe, and I am hoping that summer is finally coming to Ireland. See you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.